Thank you. Several years ago, if someone had told me that I would be working with blind people, I would have made the comment that's impossible because I don't even know a blind person. And I suddenly found myself in a position as a psychic, because that's what I am, that's what I do, doing just that. I was teaching a workshop in Batavia, New York, on how to feel psychic energy, how to see auras, how to do aura scanning, how to do remote viewing, how to do healing, etc. And the night of seeing auras, there was a man in the group, it was a large group, there was a man in the group who saw the auras so extensively that he could pick the physical problems out on the person who was standing up against the white screen. And as he was doing that, I was thinking, well, he's particularly good at this. You know, I was quite impressed because he even saw it in color. Well, I was getting myself together after the workshop. Actually, it was a six-week course. And what I did was I was packing up to go back to Buffalo, New York, which was some distance from Batavia. And a woman came up to me and she said, "Did you see how well my husband did with the aura seeing?" I said, "Yes, he's exceptionally good." She said, "Yes, but you don't know the best part. My husband is totally blind." I said, "Really?" She said, "Would you please talk to him?" I said, "Yes." What was I going to talk to him about? I had no clue. So I started out with a logical thing. I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 41 years old." I said, "How long have you been blind?" "Since I was 14. And I said, "How did you do that?" Now, this was a man who was dragged to an intuition workshop by his wife. He did not want to be there. He had not read a book. He didn't know anything about this whole field. And he stopped and he thought and he said, "Well, I did with my mind what you told the others to do with their eyes, and I could suddenly see it." And I said, "Well, that's amazing." I said, "Where did you see it? You're blind." He stopped and he thought. He said, "Well," he said, "it's like I'm seeing it from the middle of my forehead." Now, this is not a person who had read about the third eye, psychic vision, any of that kind of stuff. Yet here he was pointing to the middle of his forehead. So being as psychic as I am, I'm driving back to Buffalo and I'm thinking, boy, if that blind person could do that, I wonder if other blind people can do that. I wonder if there's been a study done on this. I wonder, if it's going on in parapsychology and I don't even know it. And I thought somebody should do something with this, never thinking it would be me. A year later, I had another blind man in my class. He was a physicist. He had no eyes. His eyes had been taken out. And he could do exactly the same things. He could be in this room here and describe a location far away. He could see auras, etc. So Sam and I put together a 7-week pilot study. He got the blind people, and we worked with them for 7 weeks and published the results. Again, I thought to myself, well, someone should do something with this. And lo and behold, the blind people said, "Will you continue to work with us in doing these things?" So week after week, we had one volunteer for every blind person, and we worked together in many ways. One of the things we did was we had a file folder for each blind person, and they each had a set of colors, and they would run their hands over the color, and I would say, "What are you feeling and where are you feeling it?" And this is the color red for you, and green and blue, etc. Then from there, we did randomized runs of colors, and by interpreting the energy, they could tell the color. We did photographs, we did aura scanning, and that type of thing. But what I'm here today to talk to you about is the remote viewing. Remote viewing in the blind. If you can just imagine having lived however many years you've lived on Earth, and suddenly, or over a short period of time, you become blind. What we found was that with these blind adults, all of them had had sight. And now we're blind, so many of them were on high blood pressure medication, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, etc. What I knew about psychic ability was that in order to get into that place, that inner place within us, relaxation is very important, concentration, meditation. And so that's what we started with. And what I'd like to do is share with you some of the ways that the blind people applied their remote viewing in their everyday lives. The first thing we did was to have we had one blind person sitting across the table from a volunteer. And the blind person would give the volunteer their address, where they lived. The volunteer would give the blind people their address. And then being up in front of the group, and there were usually about 20 blind people and 20 volunteers, I would then say, after relaxation, I would then say, okay, now in your imagination, pretend there's a duplicate of yourself standing next to you. Project that duplicate of yourself up into the air and go to the address of your partner and walk through the living room, and I'd have them use all of their sensory input. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you sense? What do you smell? What do you know about that environment? In your imagination, pretend to walk over to the couch and run your hand over the couch. What kind of material are you touching? What color or colors are you aware of? What designs are you aware of? And all of the sensory input that they could. Listen, does this person have any pets? What kind of sounds does this pet make, if there is one? And this was very, very successful. Now, I had a board of advisors made up of medical doctor, ophthalmologist, several scientists, Douglas Dean, who's a parapsychologist, et cetera. And they said, well, maybe it's just telepathy. That in itself is a feat. I said, you're right. Except here are the types of things, the kind of feedback we got from the blind people. Lola Reppenhagen was one of our excellent students. We said, Lola, here's a tape that I made on relaxation. Take it, play it every night. If I said that, Lola did that. So one time Lola had to go to, I think, Washington, D.C., to a bowling conference of some sort. And her husband usually traveled with her. Lola had been blind for many, many years. And he couldn't go this time, and she was very nervous going herself. So she thought, wait a minute, I'm participating in this program. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to get centered, and I'm going to remote view to the hotel. What I discovered that the blind person usually takes about an hour or so to acclimate themselves in an environment, as they tell me, so that they know where the chairs are and the doorways and, everything. So she did that. She remote viewed. She got where the beds were, where the curtains were, where the bathroom was, colors. She flew to Washington. She went to the hotel. She checked in, and the bellman took her up to her room. And she walked in the room, and she said to herself and then to the bellman, oh, this is the wrong room. And the bellman said, no, this is where the blind bowlers are going to be. No, she said, this is the wrong room. And she said, Carol Ann, she said, the doorway was in the wrong place, the beds were in the wrong place, the curtains were the wrong color. Now, this woman didn't even have light perception. She said it was the wrong room. So the bellman called down to the desk and found out this was true. The blind bowlers were a floor up. She walked into that room, and she said, yes, this is my room. So she was comfortable then. I said, Lola, what did the bellman think? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, this blind woman is telling him, I'm in the wrong room. What was his reaction? She said, I don't know. I was so excited about being right. I had no idea. So here we can eliminate telepathy. Something else is going on that is now labeled remote viewing. Steve Wilson from Channel 7. He set up a little test for Lola, again in this case, and to go to a meeting. And he wanted her to describe the surroundings in the meeting, where everything was, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I brought a copy of his letter to us. But anyway, he was astonished at her accuracy, how accurate she was. As a blind adult, being able to know what is going on in the room, where everything is a very, very practical tool to be able to use. Now, they did much more than that, but we're talking about remote viewing here. Pardon me? Did her bowling scores go up? That's a very good question, because that's what she said. She said that was a bonus that she got, that her bowling scores went up. That's true. Another time, Jeff Kay had a radio show, and he said he wanted to do a test. So we chose our star, Lola, although the rest of the blind people did very well, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the reasons I think it worked, because of the system we used. She was supposed to remote view to his home, where, of course, she's never been. And so she typed it up on her Braille typewriter, brought it to the radio station, handed it to him, a nervous wreck because she so loved the program and was so aware of how wonderful a program this is for the blind that she didn't want to blow it by not doing well. So he read it. He didn't say a word. We went on the air, and he read her description. And one of the things that she talked about was, I think it was in the front hall. There were several pictures there, but there was one that she noticed that was a pen and ink sketch, and it had a special meaning for him, she said. Well, it turned out that there were these pictures in his front hall there, and it was a pen and ink sketch of a thistle that his little daughter had drawn for him, and they had framed and put there. The application of remote viewing in the lives of blind people is just so vast, so profound, that we would sit there, and year after year we would work with the blind people, and you'd think you'd get used to it and say, oh yeah, well, that's natural, that's what we expect. And some of it was, and then when they told us what a difference it made in their lives, it just blew us away. Another example was Margaret Hillman. Margaret Hillman's husband brought her to the project every single Tuesday. Didn't believe in this stuff, but that was okay. If his wife was happy, that was okay with him. So Margaret went away on a trip, and while she was away, she thought, I'm going to do what we call mind traveling, now it's called remote viewing. I'm going to remote view back to my house, and I'm going to describe to my husband what he's doing. So she checked her Braille watch to see what time it was, and she went to walk up the front walk and walk up the stairs to go in the house, and she said there weren't any stairs there. So she thought, oh, I failed, you know. Here I was going to show him and prove to him there really is reality to this, and it just didn't work for me. So her husband picked her up from the airport, and she's saying, oh, by the way, last Thursday at whatever time, she said, I came to visit. I said, but obviously it didn't work because I walked up the sidewalk, I got to the stairs, and there weren't any stairs there. And there was this dead silence. And her husband said to her, well, I took the wooden steps off because they weren't as safe as I thought they would be for you, and there weren't any steps there, and now we have new cement steps. And he became what we call a believer, like this is a religion, right? But these are the types of things that occurred with the blind adults. Another instance was Father Schomer. Father Schomer was a very, very intelligent, very high IQ Jesuit. He had a photographic memory. And when he became blind, he was very disturbed. He wrote an article for our newsletter saying that he was suicidal. And what he found was that he could not do remote viewing. He could understand feeling energy, the colors, the aura scanning. He could give a scientific, acceptable for him, explanation of that. But to be able to describe a place you've never been, no way. So of course you could predict he wasn't going to do well, and he didn't. Finally, he gave up, and he said, I'm not going to try anymore. So he's paired off with this woman who obviously from her voice was an older woman. And when he walked up the sidewalk to go onto her porch, he said, I couldn't get to the porch because there were all these toys all over the place. And he said, I knew this couldn't be right, but I went around the toys and I went in and he described the living room, etc. And when he got his feedback, the woman laughed and said, well, that's right. She said, my daughter's husband left her, she moved in with me, she has 3 young children, and there are toys all over my front yard. So as much as his intellect was trying to talk him out of the experience, because he was just imagining it, he said it and it was correct. And that was a real eye-opener. That really opened Father Schomer up. Then he began to do things like his volunteer, who drove him to and from the Blind Project, said they'd lost their wallet. And he said, well, wait a minute. And he sat there and he centered himself. And he said, I think it's in a ditch when you stopped at the store. He said, I did stop at the store. So they drove over. There was his wallet in the ditch. So those are the kinds of things that occurred. Now, as we went along for several years, I got a call from the parents of blind children. And the parents said, what about our blind children? And I'm standing there saying, what about them? Because I've never worked with children. I've only worked with adults, blind adults and sighted adults. And they said, will you work with our children? So I thought, how am I going to do this? So I made an announcement in a workshop that Douglas Dean and I were teaching, and I said, I need school teachers. Now, they were taking my workshop, and that was one of the criteria that we had. To be a volunteer in the Blind Project, you had to have taken one of my classes for several reasons. One is the blind become very, very susceptible to telepathy. So if we have a skeptic sitting across from them, they're going to get that. And it's going to interfere, I felt, with their being able to, be as accurate as they possibly could. And number two, because of the terminology I used in the workshop, they would know what I was referring to then. The volunteers were required to come 20 minutes early before a session every Tuesday. So we would meditate together for 20 minutes to get all of us, our energy all together. And to fill the room so when the blind people came in, they came into the highest possible vibration, if you will. So here I had these school teachers now volunteering. So we started what we called Junior Project Blind Awareness. And the kids, these blind children, blew the adults away. You will see here, you probably can't see it from back there, but in the beginning, this is a picture of what my board of advisors, the scientists, the doctors suggested I do, was put blindfolds on the blind children. Now, half of them had glass eyes, but we were still required to put blindfolds on them. We made these boards here, cut holes in them. They put their hands through, and then there was material that fell down over their hands, and then the colors on the other side of the board. And we were required to do that to make it scientific as possible. Well, we did this, and this one day, little Lisa, I think she was 8 years old, came up to me and said, why do I have to have a blindfold on? I said, well, the scientists said, honey, it's a study, and, scientific studies. Don't they know I have glass eyes? I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. And I looked at that, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Let the scientists do the scientific research with all the controls. What I want to do is the training. Here's how we can make life easier, become more mobile, more independent, faster. So we eliminated those screens after that. One of the ways I introduced remote viewing to the children was I said, okay, now we're going to play a game. And it was just before lunch. I said, I want you to lay down, and they had done the relaxation and the concentration and the meditation. I said, now I want you to fly over to the building where we're having lunch, okay? And I want you to go into the kitchen. And I want you to take a look and see, what are we being served for lunch today? And I want you to take the top off the pots and smell. What smells do you smell that will tell you what we're having for lunch today? And then I want you to pretend to take a spoon and taste some of that. What are we having for lunch today? And then go over to the spot where you'll be sitting at the table, and what color is the placemat and the cup and the dish? Because we did different colors every day, etc. So I said, those of you who succeed, you can have lunch. Those of you who don't, well, too bad. Well, I figured it was a good incentive for them to do it. They did very well. We had the blind adults come and sit in and observe and participate, actually, too, with the blind children. And they said, oh, we try so hard. We try so hard to do it right and be accurate, and they just do it. And I said, that's right. So next week, when you're with us, just get in contact with that kid inside and just do it, okay? So one of the things that we did was I hid money we hid money, around this big room. And we hid 50-cent pieces and dollars and so on. And we decided, in our logical mind, that it would take, maybe an hour for them to find all the money we had hid. So they came, we had them remote view in the room. And 15 minutes later, we had to come up with something else to do with them because they'd found all the money. Again, they had that incentive to do well. One of the things that we did also was to bring the parents in, and we would have the blind child scan the aura of the parent. But the part I want to talk about here is we had them take their parent's shoe and scan their shoe and get the feeling of their parent's energy from the shoe, from their body, etc. Then we would send their parents out onto the campus, because we were in a church campus. And we would say, all right, now we want you to find your parent. And they would remote view to find their parent. Well, I found out from the parents of blind children that their children's biggest fear was getting lost. And so to be able to have a tool to be able to use in the middle of a department store, take a deep breath, tell yourself to relax, get centered, get your parent, mother, father, in your mind, remember what their energy feels like, and find them, remote view to where they are. And many times, not many times, but sometimes they get off the bus at the wrong stop and get very scared, et cetera, et cetera. So they found that this technique was particularly meaningful to the blind children. Of course, it is to blind adults too, but the children in particular I found. One of the things that occurred with the children was we did the project, and I got a call from, remember That's Incredible, that TV show, That's Incredible? Well, I got a call from the people, the director or producer, whatever they call them, and they said, we'd like to do a piece on your blind project. Would you be able to do that for us? And so we talked about it, and I thought, well, the best person to do that would be 14-year-old Lisa Hoffman. Lisa Hoffman lived in Rochester, New York. Lisa had had her eyes removed when she was 3 months old from cancer, and she had glass eyes. But Lisa's parents were very unique. Lisa bowled, she sculpted, she went to regular school, did her Braille typewriter, she'd met the Queen of England, she had been on TV before, so I thought she might be a really good candidate because of all the lights and the cameras and all that kind of stuff. So I called her parents, we talked about it, they agreed, very enthusiastically as a matter of fact, and so the crew flew from California to Rochester, New York. They spent a day with Lisa, letting her touch the equipment and everything. They were just delightful. Then as the camera began to roll, they gave me an address. And in the piece, you'll see Lisa laying down, and I'm sitting next to her, and I tell her, okay, in your imagination, Lisa, imagine a duplicate of yourself standing next to you, and now project that duplicate of yourself up into the air. Project yourself to whatever the address was, which I don't remember. And no one in the room knew the address. And then I would say, okay, now stand at the front door. And I'm telling you parts of this because the sound is so terrible on this, I'm afraid. I've listened to it so much, I don't know how much you can actually understand and how much, is garbled up. But anyway, she goes to the front door, and she said, the door is made out of wood. I said, reach out and pretend to touch the door. The door is made out of wood, and there's a little window in it, and she saw red. Well, you'll see the piece. I said, all right, now step inside of the door. What's to your immediate left? Describe. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you sense? What do you know is to your immediate left? Directly ahead of you to your right. And as you're standing there, you're feeling this gentle pulling. Now, this took 45 minutes, so, and you're being drawn to the living room. And stand in the doorway of the living room. And what does that living room feel like? And she describes it as light and airy. And then I tell her, are there any couches in the living room? And you'll see in the piece, it's only about 7 minutes long. She says there are 2 couches facing one another. And there's an unusual table between them. And you'll see this unusual table, and there's a ceramic pot and candles, and I think a book on it, she said. And she said in 45 minutes, As we later found out, she made 2 mistakes. 2 things were inaccurate. One was the color of the couch. After they finished filming, we're wanting to know, how did Lisa do? We don't know. No one's been there. So they flew to California, they went to the address, and they began filming as they walked up to the front door, etc. So only after it was shown on That's Incredible did we have a clue whether Lisa did well, poorly, wonderfully, and she did incredibly well. One of the things you'll see in the piece is I say, okay, Lisa, walk over to the windows and touch what's hanging in the windows. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking curtains, drapes, Venetian blinds, you know, something like that. There's nothing hanging in the windows except a crescent-shaped moon, which is a neon light. So it doesn't show it in the piece, but what Lisa said, well, there's nothing hanging in the windows. She said, but there's a funny shape in the window. And she made the shape of the crescent moon. Then later, and this is the way the piece ends, no, she said also there's a piece of furniture there, but it's used as a bookcase. And it was an antique desk that was used as a bookcase. Then at the end, I say, you know, is there anything else? And she said, there's a clock. And I said, what does a clock look like? And she takes her hands, and it's as if she had her hands over the clock. You can see that in the piece. Another thing I said, is there a fireplace? Yes, there is. And there are art pieces around the fireplace of pieces of metal welded together. And the woman who lived there, her father was an artist, and that was his art form. And on the couch, she saw these handmade pillows. And the woman who lived there, her mother made these handmade pillows. And I'm telling you all this because, as I said, the sound isn't real good, but I'm not sure how good it is or how good it isn't. And also, I have pictures up here. As you can see, I'm very non-tech, of the children's project. Here they're laying on colors and feeling the colors with their nose and their elbow and so on, so they can know what the colors feel like. And here are the different techniques that we did with them. So if you'd like to take a look, why, please do. So can we do this? And this is the one criticism I have of the piece, is they imply that she's unique and different, and most of the children did equally as well. That's the only criticism I ever had of this piece.
The ability of a young girl who has been blind since birth to travel in her imagination. It's a story which is fully documented and projects a fascinating premise, a remarkable new possibility in the use of the human brain.
We're at Arrondecourt High School in Rochester, New York. It's a normal classroom in every way, except for one special student.
She's a 14-year-old freshman named Lisa Hoffman, a truly incredible young lady. Lisa is a top student, a talented musician who plays violin in the school orchestra. She's also totally blind.
She receives no special privileges because of her blindness, but relies on a Braille typewriter in order to take class notes.
Here, take your hand.
Recently, Lisa demonstrated that she had other special talents, an apparent gift of ESP.
Onto red.
Carol Ann Liaros is a parapsychology researcher. She has developed programs to teach the blind how to develop their own psychic awareness.
There's nothing mystical about ESP at all. It takes an attitude of learning, just like learning anything else. Open-mindedness, curiosity, willing to apply yourself in practice. And of course, practice is very important because the ESP process is a very subtle one.
Carol is about to perform a color-sensing experiment with
And
Lisa.
this happened right on camera. This wasn't a setup thing.
I'm going to take the 2 sheets and place them in front of you, Lisa. And with your hand, quickly scan each sheet, experiencing the physical sensation of that sheet. Then verbalize if these sheets are the same or different.
This one seems cooler.
Okay. All right. What does that tell you?
White.
Right.
What is red?
Very good. Excellent. So you're telling me they're different.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good. Good.
Mind travel is the ability to travel through time and space. And people ask, how is that possible? And I certainly agree with some physicists who have the theory that there is no time and space. And I feel that this is how mind travel works. People's minds are able to reach this dimension and therefore be able to transcend what we conceptualize as time and space.
Recently, Carol Ann Liaros conducted a mind travel experiment with Lisa. She was told to imagine that she was flying across the country to a specific destination where she'd never been before. The destination was to be a house. Now, the house was selected by filmmakers Glenn and Karen Winters. They're here in our studio now. Glenn and Karen Winters, ladies and gentlemen. Glenn and Karen, was there any possible way that Lisa would have known anything about your house?
Absolutely not. There's no way she could have known about it because the house that was selected for her to mind travel to was our house.
It was actually your own house.
Our own house. And this was done for a couple of reasons. For one thing, Lisa lives in New York. We live in California, thousands of miles away. Now, we didn't meet her, we didn't know her, we didn't do anything with her or her family or the parapsychologist before we did the filming of this piece. So there was no way we had contact with each other. We were strangers. We walked in, we did the filming of the piece. Now, the one thing that's interesting is that we also did not tell her what the target of the house was going to be until the moment that we gave the address to Carol Ann. So there is absolutely no way that she could have possibly known where she was supposed to go.
Now, you filmed this sequence. Glenn, this must be a mind-blowing experience to have this happen, especially with your own house.
It really is. One of our special interests is filming parapsychology, and we've done other experiments before. But this is the first time we've ever had something so dramatic happen right in front of us.
This is Lisa's target home. She was told only the street address and the city.
Now that you're approaching the address that I gave you in Los Angeles, California, Lisa, I want you to be aware that you have permission of the owners to enter this dwelling. And when you do, I want you to be aware of all of your sensory input. You're now approaching the front of the house, and you're going to pay attention to what is in the front.
It's made of wood, and there's a window near the top.
See, this is where I don't
Step
know how much
inside
you
the
can
front
understand what
door,
she's saying. And she said a
and
wooden
turn to your
door
immediate
with
left.
the red.
What do you feel or sense or know is there?
To the left is a door into a
To the
room.
left is a doorway to a room.
To the right, there's another door.
To the right is
In
another
front of
door.
me, there's another door.
And in the front of me is another doorway.
And to the right of me, there's the living room.
Now that you're standing in the doorway of the living room, stand there for a minute and get the feeling of the room, the atmosphere of it.
It's basically a light and airy.
It's light and airy.
And in your imagination, placing your hand on the walls, what do you perceive there?
It has a rough texture.
It's a rough texture.
As you feel and experience that room, what furniture do you become aware of?
There's two sofas that are facing each other. And they're blue.
She says they're blue, but
They
obviously
have
they're not.
pillows on them. There are a lot of pillows.
A lot of
Some
pillows.
of them are handmade. They have different textures.
As you're pretending to be in the living room in your imagination, Lisa, what captures your attention the most?
There's an unusual table. The top of it
Unusual
is
table.
smooth surface. There's some books and some candles and something made of clay or ceramics or pottery.
Is there any other furniture in that area?
There are bookshelves, but they're not. They have cupboards underneath. It's not just a bookshelf. It's a piece of furniture.
But it's used as a
Anything
bookshelf.
else that you notice?
There's something hanging in one of the windows. And it's not stuck to the window, it's hanging. And it's about this tall.
What else do you notice in this living room, Lisa?
There's this fireplace. It has tools near it,
Fireplace with tools.
and there's a sculpture. It's made
Sculptures.
of metal. The soliders are welded together.
Anything else?
There's a clock.
Can you sort of describe what that's like?
It's made of wood. It looks like this.
Once people become accustomed to mind travel, they realize the potentials of their own mind. They begin to feel more secure, more relaxed. They feel that they have more control of their own world and of the world. And the basis of our program is to have people become sensitive to energies emanating from objects, people, things, and so on, interpret those energies, and control them.
Dad, what goes next?
And now the sound
After the
gets
sugar.
real good again.
Into the sugar. 2 eggs and 3/4 cup of flour.
At home, Lisa often does much of the cooking. It's something that gives her great pleasure. As to her apparent psychic abilities, Lisa is not especially impressed. She is quick to point out that she doesn't use the techniques she's learned to show off. Rather, she sees them as a way to more fully sense and understand the world around her.
As I said, my only criticism of the piece was the fact that they implied that she had these special abilities when the rest of the children and the adults, at various degrees of accuracy, but did very, very well. In fact, after a while, we got so used to it, we took it for granted. And when college classes would like to come in and observe and so on, and oh my, look what they're doing. Oh yeah, that's right, that's unusual, and so on. Aggie Tucko, who's here, is the assistant director, and she knows a lot about it. If you have any questions, as you see me around the conference or comments, please feel free to ask them. I'd like to finish up with this piece, and then I'll take questions briefly for my time. At the end of the program, we brought the blind children in, their parents and their siblings, for a week, and worked with the parents, worked with the children. And at the end, the volunteers went out and bought a gift, specially for the child. In other words, not a one-gift-fits-all type of thing, but found out what their interests were, what they liked, and put the gift in a big box with a lot of tissue paper, put it in a big box, put colored paper on the outside of the box and a colorful bow. And then at the end, as our closing, we sat in a circle, and they were to remote view into the box and see what gift was waiting for them. So one of the little boys, I think he was about 9 years old, he said, I feel a breeze blowing in my face. And he said, I'm hearing a sound like a motor. He said, it's an airplane. And he opened the box, and sure enough, there was a model airplane for him. Another little girl said, I see a doll, and she's got long, wavy hair, and she has a beautiful frilly dress on. And so they opened the box, and what was in it was this music box, this round music box like this. And the volunteer said, oh, honey, you have a music box. No, there's a doll in there. And she said, no, honey, it's a music box. No, there's a doll in there. This is a blind girl with glass eyes. And she grabbed the box from her volunteer, and she goes through it, and she pulled out the doll with the long hair, frilly dress that went on the top of the music box and went around. So I'm sitting there, and I turned to this parent. The parents were observing this parent next to me, this woman, mother, and I look at her, I go to say something to her, and she's got tears streaming down her face. And she said, when I think of the potential for my child, I'm overwhelmed. So I could go on and on for hours with the examples of the blind people with remote viewing, but I would like to allow some time for questions before my time is up. Yes? What is Lisa doing today? She still lives in Rochester, New York. She works for a travel agency, and I see her, every couple of years or so. She's a delightful young woman. Yes?
I'd like to know if you've worked with people who are born blind, and if so, did you see a
good question. Did I work with people who were born blind, and did I see a difference? No. Some of these children were born blind, and we didn't see any difference in that. I don't know about the blind adults because I don't think we ever had a blind adult who had been born blind. All the adults that we worked with over the years had sight and became blind. Yes? That's a good question. If they were born blind, you have to have them verbalize a color. Here's how we did this. We did this with the blind adults and the blind children. Okay, here you'll see in the picture we have these huge laminated sheets. These were the smaller ones for the adults. And we would have them lay on the color and touch it with their elbow and put their nose on it and do their knees on it and say, okay, what are you feeling? 2 words, blind adults or blind children. What are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? Describe that. They describe it. We say, okay, now that is the color red for you. Okay? Then we do green, and then we take them through a run of, okay, I feel tingling in the palm of my hand and a warm middle finger. That's red for me. So they'd interpret it. However, what happened with the adults was after a few weeks, and a very few weeks, they began to say, well, this is red. They didn't feel the sensation anymore. They saw the color in their head. My board of advisors here, the doctors and ophthalmologists, said, well, they have color memory. But we had the same thing happen with the children, even those born blind. So, yes?
Is there a particular reason you use the statement imagine?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Was there a reason you used the statement imagine as a duplicate of yourself?
Yes, because I found that in working with sighted people, that if I just told them to, to describe a place at a distance, their intellect got in the way. So if I led them through an imaginary experience, it went from imaginary into intuitive or psychic impressions, if you will. And so I found that worked very well.
So that was a way of helping disconnect.
Yeah, to get past that. Yes? Okay. The question is, she has a friend who's low vision. What can she bring back from the conference to bring to this person? I made a whole series of tapes with the techniques on them for adults and blind, and the blind get them free. So I have one called Mind Traveling, which is what we called it way back then, but now we call it remote viewing. And we send those to the blind free. So if you request it or have them request it, we'll send it at no charge. And it takes them through it exactly as if I was standing in front of them. I hesitate for the same amount of time, etc. And usually we send the relaxation tape with it because that's so important. Uh-huh. Yes?
This is maybe a subject myself, but very quickly. What's your position on the abilities of people to develop the RV skills between individuals who are born blind and individuals that might become blind due to accidents?
I think it was the same question, wasn't it, that this other woman asked about whether the difference between being born blind or becoming blind later? No, it's not the same question.
Do you see any difference in people's abilities to develop RV skills?
No, we saw no difference. Over the period of many years, we've probably worked with, I don't know, what would you say, Aggie, 500, 600 blind people? Yeah. And we didn't notice any difference. But again, we weren't doing a scientific study, we were doing a training, but we didn't notice any difference. Yes?
I think one reason for that is that we didn't treat them any different. We acted like they were just like the same.
Yeah, we did treat. Yeah. The techniques I carried out were exactly the same for the blind as the sighted. There was no difference at all. And I don't know if that makes any difference, but that's my perception to do it that way is what it led me to. There were a lot of intangibles in the experience. For example, you know, we meditated ahead of time to get in tune with one another, to get in tune with the blind people, to have the energy high. There was a great feeling of caring. It was a very nurturing environment. It was fun. This is a learning experience, not a test. Let's have fun doing it, etc. You know, a lot of intangible stuff that I think made it successful. And I think you brought it up, Aggie. We had an expectation of success. I'll give you an example, and I know I'm out of time here. But I asked for volunteers in the 6-week course that Douglas Dean and I were teaching. And one of the volunteers was Sean Zeeler, a physiological psychologist. And before the pilot study started, we got together, and I said, okay, now here's what we're going to do the first week, and here's why we're going to do it. And it'll take this amount of time, and what do you think? And, you know, I want your input. And he said, now, okay, but what if it doesn't work? We have them for 2 hours. What if it doesn't work? What are we going to do then? And I said, Sean, it's going to work. He said, but Carol Ann, you don't know how this... I said, Sean, you're a scientist and I'm a psychic, and I'm telling you it's going to work. So I went in with an expectation of success because I had taught thousands of sighted people. So it never occurred to me that it would fail. And I'm sure that was communicated both subliminally and overtly. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed being with you, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.